On June 10, 1991, 8 men began disappearing across South Philadelphia, later found dead in dumpsters, vacant lots, and the Schuylkill River. They shared 2 things. They belonged to the same local gang, and every one of them had been present during a single act of public humiliation days earlier. The method was deliberate and systematic, carried out quietly over 14 days, each death spaced, controlled, and unmistakably intentional. The perpetrators were 3 brothers, Anthony Sabatini, Domenico Sabatini, and Frank Sabatini, sons of a third-generation Italian deli owner who had spent 42 years feeding the same neighborhood that watched him collapse. Philadelphia police would later describe the case as one of the most disciplined civilian revenge campaigns the city had seen in decades. But the reason was not drugs. It was not money. It was not even a territorial dispute. It was a butcher shop, a storefront on 9th Street, a counter soaked in urine, a father humiliated in public until his body failed. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains shocking events. South Philadelphia in 1991 was a dense 7-square-mile grid of row houses packed with nearly 160,000 residents. The streets carried sound easily. Arguments, laughter, sirens, and reputation all traveled block to block without obstruction. Summer heat regularly exceeded 92 degrees by mid-afternoon, trapping the smells of diesel exhaust, spoiled trash, hot oil from corner stores, and the faint metallic scent of the Schuylkill River, drifting inland when the wind shifted. Morning brought the smell of bread from bakeries that opened at 4 a.m., coffee from corner shops, and occasionally the sweet rot of produce left too long in alley bins. The neighborhood survived for decades on dock labor, manufacturing, and unionized trades. By the early 1990s, those industries had collapsed. The Philadelphia Naval Shipyard had shed over 7,000 jobs since 1987. Manufacturing plants closed, scattering workers into partial employment or permanent idleness. In some census tracts, unemployment exceeded 14%. Legitimate opportunity disappeared. Street economies replaced it. Law enforcement coverage was thin and reactive. The 3rd Police District was responsible for tens of thousands of residents with limited patrols and aging equipment. Nonviolent calls routinely waited over 40 minutes for response. Witnesses rarely cooperated. Retaliation was assumed. Silence was self-defense, practiced by people who understood that talking brought consequences faster than justice. In this environment, respect was not emotional. It was functional. A business owner without respect lost customers, suppliers, and safety. Public humiliation was not embarrassment. It was a signal that protection had expired, that boundaries could be crossed without cost. When institutions fail, communities default to older rules. Honor becomes currency. Reputation becomes armor. And once publicly stripped, it must be restored publicly, or never at all. The neighborhood operated on these unwritten codes, enforced through glances, whispers, and occasional violence that everyone pretended not to see. Sal Sabatini built his life navigating these rules. When they failed him, his sons stepped into the vacuum. Anthony Sabatini was 39 years old in June of 1991. 6'1", broad through the shoulders, with thick hands shaped by decades of knife work. A diagonal scar cut across his left thumb, earned at 16 slicing mortadella during a lunch rush when his attention wandered. He moved slowly, purposefully. His eyes rarely wandered from the task in front of him. Anthony woke every morning at 4:45 a.m. Coffee came first. Café Bustelo, brewed strong in a percolator his mother bought in 1967. Drunk standing at the kitchen counter while looking out at the alley behind his row house. He thought about inventory, bills, his father's blood pressure, and whether the neighborhood still respected the family name. He worked full-time at Sabatini's Fine Meats on South 9th Street, a shop opened by his father in 1949 after returning from the Pacific Theater. Anthony had been there since childhood, sweeping floors at 8 years old, learning the knives at 12, running the counter at 17. He briefly worked warehouse shifts near the docks until layoffs ended that path in 1983. The docks paid better. The deli paid nothing some weeks. But it was the family name, and names mattered. Anthony served in the U.S. Army from 1972 to 1976, stationed at Fort Bragg. No combat deployment, no overseas assignment. He learned inventory management, equipment maintenance, and how to plan operations without emotion. The service taught him that discipline was the difference between intention and execution, that following procedure kept you alive when improvisation got people killed. He returned to Philadelphia in 1976 and returned to the deli. Anthony married Maria DeLuca in 1979 at Holy Trinity Church. They met at a cousin's wedding. She was a secretary at a law firm downtown. They had 2 children. Salvatore Jr., 11, quiet and observant, who watched everything and said little. Lucia, 8, sharp and fearless, who argued with nuns at school and made Anthony laugh despite himself. Sunday dinners were non-negotiable. The whole family gathered at his parents' house. His mother cooked. His father told the same stories. Anthony's brothers brought wine. On June 5, 1991, Anthony watched his father suffer a massive stroke behind the deli counter. Salvatore Sabatini was 67 years old. He survived, partially paralyzed on his left side, his speech permanently damaged into slurred fragments that frustrated him into silence. The stroke came minutes after 8 gang members left the shop, minutes after the humiliation, minutes after 17 witnesses watched and did nothing. What Anthony valued most was not money. The deli barely broke, even most months. What he valued was dignity. That value came from his father, who taught him that a man's name was his inheritance, passed down through work and reputation, and once destroyed publicly, it could not be rebuilt privately. Anthony carried this belief like a second spine. It kept him standing when the docks closed. It kept him working 70-hour weeks. It kept him polite to customers who complained about prices while buying imported prosciutto they couldn't pronounce. Anthony's daily routine was rigid. Wake at 4:45. Coffee, drive to the shop by 5:30, unlock the gate, check the cold storage, prep the display cases. His father arrived at 6 all for 42 years. Now his father sat in a chair at home, one side of his face slack, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Anthony was holding his life together through routine. And routine was breaking. The object at the center of everything was the deli counter. 12 feet of solid maple, scarred by 40 years of knives, elbows, coins, and conversations. Its replacement value was roughly $1,200. Salvatore Sabatini built it himself in 1951, with lumber from a demolished church. His own father, Antonio, stood behind it when the shop first opened, slicing Coca-Cola with hands gnarled from factory work. Anthony learned the trade behind that counter, standing on a milk crate at age 9, while his father guided his hands through the motion of the knife, teaching him to read the grain of the meat, to respect the blade, to take pride in the cut. Every morning for 42 years, Sal ran his hand along its surface before opening, a ritual so automatic he didn't know he was doing it. The maple had darkened over decades, absorbing oil and wear and the weight of family history. Anthony's children did their homework on that counter after school, while he closed the shop. Maria leaned against it during slow afternoons, drinking coffee and talking about bills, about Lucia's report card, about whether they could afford to fix the furnace. When gang members urinated on that counter, while neighbors watched from behind locked doors, it was not vandalism. It was erasure. The counter represented continuity, reputation, a family that survived economic collapse through stubborn pride and quality mortadella. Once desecrated publicly, it could not simply be cleaned. Its meaning was destroyed. Sal tried to clean it himself. He scrubbed for 20 minutes, his breathing getting heavier, his face getting redder, while Anthony watched and felt something cold settle in his chest. Then Sal collapsed. Anthony caught him before he hit the floor. The ambulance took 14 minutes to arrive. The primary target was Marco Alvarez, 24 years old, leader of the 9th Street Kings. Thin, sharp-faced, missing a front tooth from a childhood fight over a bicycle. He ran drug sales along a 4-block territory and operated informal protection schemes that extracted $50 to $200 monthly from businesses that couldn't afford to refuse. Marco lived with his mother and younger sister in a second-floor walk-up 3 blocks from the deli. He supported them both. His mother cleaned houses. His sister was 16 and still in school. Marco wanted her to graduate, to avoid the path he'd taken, though he never said this out loud and wouldn't have known how. Marco did not intend to cause a stroke. He intended to assert dominance and entertain his crew, to remind the neighborhood that the old rules were dead, and he wrote the new ones. The other 7 were Luis Ramirez, 19, recently enrolled in a GED program at the community center, trying to finish what he'd abandoned at 16. Tyrone Banks, 28, unemployed construction worker with 2 children under 5 and no prospects since the housing project stopped. Angel Cruz, 22, amateur boxer training for his first sanctioned fight scheduled for July in a gym near the river. Derek Miles, 31, caretaker for an elderly aunt with dementia, the only family he had left. Jose Molina, 26, newly married to a woman from his church, trying to save for an apartment outside the neighborhood. Calvin Price, 34, recently paroled after 4 years for distribution, trying to stay clean and failing slowly. Eddie Foster, 21, lookout and instigator, the youngest and loudest, always pushing situations further than necessary. All were present. All participated or benefited. None intervened. They were not born predators. They were products of the same collapse that killed the docks and emptied the factories and left young men with nothing to do but claim territory and extract survival from whoever couldn't fight back. Marco knew the Sabatinis. He'd bought sandwiches there as a kid. Anthony remembered him, a quiet boy who said thank you and counted his change carefully. Something had shifted. The neighborhood had shifted. Respect had become something you took instead of earned. On June 5, 1991, at 3:17 p.m., 8 gang members entered Sabatini's Fine Meats. 15 customers were inside. 6 neighbors watched from across the street through shop windows. The temperature was 87 degrees. Anthony was behind the counter, slicing capicola for Mrs. Russo, who came in every Wednesday and bought the same order. His father was restocking the cold case. Dom was in the back, unpacking deliveries. The bell above the door rang. Marco walked in first. Luis and Eddie followed. The others spread out along the walls. Anthony looked up, made eye contact, nodded. Marco didn't nod back. The shop went quiet. Mrs. Russo stepped away from the counter, clutching her purse. Marco walked slowly toward the counter, hands in his pockets, grinning. "Yo, Anthony, what's good? Help you with something, Marco?" "Yeah, maybe. Maybe you can help me. How much you pay for protection around here?" "Don't need protection." "That right? You sure about that?" "Pretty sure." Marco looked around at his crew, grinning wider. Eddie laughed. Luis shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Anthony's father stepped forward, his voice calm. "Marco, your mother know you're here?" Marco's grin disappeared. "Don't talk about my mother. She's a good woman, raised you better than this." "You don't know nothing about how I was raised, old man." Anthony stepped forward. "Marco, take your crew and go." "Or what?" "Or nothing, just go." Marco looked at the deli case, at the counter, at Sal standing there, weathered and tired, a man who'd worked 42 years in the same spot. Marco reached out and shoved a display of olive oil off the counter. Glass shattered. Oil spread across the tile. Mrs. Russo gasped. No one moved. Eddie walked to the wall and sprayed graffiti across the family photos, black paint covering 3 generations. Tyrone overturned a barrel of olives. Brine flooded the floor. Anthony started to move. Marco pulled a knife. Not to use, just to show. "Stay right there." Anthony stopped. Sal's breathing got heavier. His face reddened. Eddie walked behind the counter, laughing, unzipping his jeans. Anthony watched. 17 people watched. Eddie urinated on the maple counter, the stream loud in the silence, splashing onto the wood that Sal's father had installed, that Anthony had learned his trade behind, that held 42 years of family history. Marco laughed. Luis looked away. Jose shifted toward the door. Eddie finished, zipped up, turned and grinned at Anthony. "That's what I think of your protection." They walked out. The bell rang. The door closed. Sal stood there staring at the counter, breathing hard. He picked up a rag, started scrubbing. His hands shook. His breathing got louder. Anthony moved toward him. "Pop, stop. I'll clean it." Sal didn't stop. He scrubbed harder, his face dark red, veins standing out on his forehead. He made a sound, half grunt, half gasp. Then his left side collapsed. The rag fell. He grabbed for the counter, missed. Anthony caught him as he went down. Dom ran from the back. Mrs. Russo screamed. Someone called 911. 17 people had watched. 17 people had seen the Sabatini name destroyed. None of them intervened. The ambulance arrived at 3:31 p.m. Sal was still conscious, his left side paralyzed, his speech already slurred into nothing. They loaded him onto a stretcher. Anthony rode with him. Dom stayed to clean the shop. The counter was soaked. The wood would stain. The smell wouldn't come out. Anthony filed a police report at the 3rd District on June 6, 1991. He sat across from Detective Raymond Kowalski in a small interview room that smelled like old coffee and sweat. The fluorescent lights hummed. Anthony explained what happened. The vandalism, the assault, the public humiliation, the stroke. Kowalski took notes, looked tired, asked questions without much hope. You know, these guys? Marco Alvarez, Luis Ramirez, Eddie Foster, couple others. You got witnesses? 17 people saw it. Any of them willing to testify? Anthony was quiet. Kowalski nodded. That's what I thought. So what do I do? File charges. We'll investigate. See if we can build a case. How long will that take? Depends. If witnesses cooperate, maybe a few months. If not, Kowalski shrugged. You could try a civil suit, sue for damages. I don't have money for a lawyer. Then I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry about your father. But without witnesses, without evidence, there's not much we can do. These guys know how the system works. They know people won't talk. Anthony sat there. The lights hummed. Kowalski's phone rang. He answered, talked about a different case, hung up, looked at Anthony. Look, off the record, you want my advice? Yeah. Clean up your shop. Move on. Don't let them see it bothers you. Eventually, they'll find someone else. That's it? That's the reality. I'm sorry. Anthony walked out. It was raining. He stood in the parking lot, feeling the water soak through his shirt, understanding that the law had closed. The system had failed. He'd known it before walking in, but trying mattered. Following the proper channels mattered. Because what came next required knowing that every legitimate option had been exhausted. He drove home. Maria was waiting. The kids were at school. He told her what the detective said. She nodded, unsurprised. She'd lived in this neighborhood her whole life. She knew how things worked. What are you going to do? Anthony didn't answer. He went upstairs, changed his shirt, went to the hospital to sit with his father. On June 7, 1991, at 9:42 p.m., Anthony sat at the kitchen table with Dom and Frank. The kitchen was small, yellow linoleum, worn through to the underlayer near the sink, fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Coffee percolated on the stove. Maria was upstairs putting the kids to bed. Through the ceiling, they could hear Lucia arguing about brushing her teeth. Frank smoked a Marlboro, tapping ash into a ceramic tray. Dom sat with his hands folded, waiting. Anthony spoke quietly. Pop's not coming back to the shop. Doctors say that? Frank asked. Don't need doctors to say it. You saw him. Dom nodded. So what do we do? We handle it. Silence. The coffee percolated. Upstairs, a door closed. Footsteps crossed the floor. Frank stubbed out his cigarette. Handle it how? You know how? Anthony, you see another way? We could talk to them. Make them pay for damages. You think they'll pay? Dom shook his head. They'll laugh. We could go to their families. Talk to Marco's mother. And say what? Anthony's voice stayed level. Ask her to control her son? She can't. And even if she could, that doesn't fix what happened. Doesn't fix that 17 people watched them destroy Pop's counter, and nobody did a damn thing. Frank leaned back. You're talking about killing them. I'm talking about making it right. That's not making it right. That's murder. That's justice when the law won't do anything. The law takes time. Maybe they'll... The law's not coming, Frank. You know it. I know it. They know it. That's why they did it in front of 17 people. Because they knew nobody would stop them. Dom looked at his hands. How many? All of them. Jesus, Anthony. Everyone who was there. Everyone who participated. That's the only way it means something. Frank stood up, paced to the window, looked out at the alley. You know what happens if we do this. Yeah. We go to prison. for life. Maybe death penalty. Probably. Your kids grow up without a father. They grow up knowing their father wasn't a coward, that their grandfather's name meant something. That's supposed to comfort them? Anthony didn't answer. The coffee stopped percolating. Maria's footsteps came down the stairs. She stopped in the doorway, looked at the three of them, understood immediately. She walked to the stove, poured coffee into 4 cups, set them on the table, looked at Anthony. You've already decided? Yeah. I can't stop you. No. She nodded, picked up her coffee, went back upstairs without another word. Frank turned from the window. I'm in. Dom looked up. You sure? No, but I'm in anyway. They both looked at Anthony. Silence settled. Outside, a car passed. A dog barked. Somewhere down the block, music played from an open window. Dom picked up his coffee, drank, set the cup down. How do we do it? Anthony pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. 8 names written in careful print. He spread it on the table. One at a time, quiet, no witnesses. Space them out so it doesn't look connected right away. We start with the ones on the edges. Save Marco for last. Where? Wherever we find them. We watch. We learn their routines. We wait for the right moment. What do we use? Pop's revolver, Uncle Carlo's shotgun, anything that doesn't trace back recent. Frank tapped another cigarette from his pack. When do we start? Tomorrow. We start watching tomorrow. We move when we're ready. And when it's done, we turn ourselves in, clean, no running. We did what we did, and we take the consequences. Dom nodded slowly. Frank lit his cigarette. The kitchen clock ticked. They sat there, 3 brothers, understanding they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What Anthony didn't know, what none of them could know yet, was that the counter they were killing to avenge would be destroyed during the police investigation, ripped out as evidence, and later discarded when the case closed. That Lucia would refuse to speak to him for 11 years. That Salvatore Jr. would change his name and move to Oregon. That Maria would visit exactly once in 1993 and never come back. That the shop on 9th Street would close in 1995 and become a cell phone store that failed and became a check-cashing place that failed and finally became a vacant lot. They didn't know any of this yet. They just sat at the kitchen table and planned 8 murders with the calm focus of men who believed they were doing the only thing honor allowed. For 10 days they watched. Anthony took the first shift each morning, parking his truck 3 blocks from Marco's building at 6 a.m., watching who came and went. Dom covered afternoons. Frank took evenings. They learned routines. Marco left his building every day at 2 p.m., walked to the corner store, bought a Coke and cigarettes, came back. Luis worked part-time at an auto shop, left at 7, walked home alone. Eddie hung around the basketball courts until dark. Tyrone spent most days on his girlfriend's porch, drinking beer and watching cars pass. They documented everything in a small notebook. Times, locations, patterns, who was alone, and when. Anthony bought ammunition at a sporting goods store in Delaware, across state lines paying cash. The clerk looked at the quantity and raised an eyebrow. Stocking up. Deer season coming. Got a big family. This is a lot of ammunition for deer. Like I said, big family. The clerk rang it up without further comment. They used weapons from family. Their father's Smith & Wesson .38, kept in a lockbox under his bed since 1967. Uncle Carlo's Remington .870, inherited when Carlo died in 1988. A Browning 22 that had belonged to their grandfather. Nothing purchased recently. Nothing that created a paper trail. Dom mapped routes. Which streets had cameras? Which alleys stayed dark? Where they could approach without being seen? Frank identified vehicles they could use. His own truck, Dom's Buick. A van borrowed from a cousin who didn't ask questions. On June 16th, their mother came to visit. She found Anthony in the garage, cleaning the revolvers. She stood in the doorway, silent, watching him work. Finally, she spoke. "Your father wouldn't want this. Pop's not in a position to want anything. You think killing those boys brings him back?" "No." "Then what's the point?" Anthony didn't look up, kept cleaning. "The point is that 17 people watched them destroy everything Pop built, and nobody did anything. The point is that if we don't do this, they'll know the Sabatini name means nothing. That you can walk into our shop, piss on our counter, put our father in the hospital, and walk away laughing. And if you do this, you go to prison forever. Your children lose their father. Maria loses her husband. I lose my son. Is that honor? That's the cost." She was quiet for a long time. "Then, once you cross this line, Anthony, you can't come back. You understand that? Whatever you think you're defending, it dies the moment you pull that trigger. Maybe, not maybe, certainly, you'll become exactly what you're trying to fight. I'll become what the world made necessary." She looked at him, her oldest son, stubborn like his father, rigid in his principles, unable to bend even when bending would save him. She turned and walked away. At the door, she stopped. "God help you, Anthony, because nobody else can." On June 17th, they loaded the trunk of Dom's Buick. The weapons wrapped in canvas, a change of clothes, gloves, everything methodical, everything planned. Anthony sat in the living room with Lucia while she did homework. Math problems, fractions. She struggled with division. He helped her, patient, explaining the steps. She got frustrated. He stayed calm. Maria watched from the kitchen doorway. When Lucia finished, she hugged him goodnight. He held her longer than usual. She pulled away, looking at him strangely. "You okay, Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. I'm okay. You seem sad. Just tired." She kissed his cheek and went upstairs. Maria walked into the living room, sat beside him, took his hand. "Last chance to stop this." "Can't stop." "You mean won't?" "Same thing now." She nodded. "When you're gone, don't expect me to bring the kids to visit. I won't let them see you in a cage. I know. I loved you, Anthony. I want you to know that. Before everything changes, I loved you. I love you too. Not enough, apparently." She went upstairs. Anthony sat in the dark living room, listening to the house settle, knowing this was the last normal night. That tomorrow would begin something that would destroy everything he'd built alongside the thing he was trying to defend. 7:34 p.m., June 18th, 1991. Temperature 68 degrees. Overcast, the air heavy with coming rain. Anthony sat in the passenger seat of Dom's Buick, parked on a side street with a clear view of the basketball courts where Eddie Foster spent his evenings. Dom was behind the wheel. Frank waited 2 blocks away in his truck. Anthony's heart rate was steady, his breathing controlled. He gripped the Smith & Wesson in his right hand, feeling its familiar weight, the worn grip that had molded to his father's hand over decades. Eddie was on the court, playing one-on-one with a kid Anthony didn't recognize, laughing, talking trash. The court lights hummed overhead. Eddie was 21 years old, the youngest, the one who'd urinated on the counter while everyone watched. Anthony watched him play for 20 minutes, waiting. At 7:52, Eddie's opponent left. Eddie stood there alone, bouncing the ball, shooting free throws. The court emptied. Eddie grabbed his jacket from the fence, started walking home. Anthony and Dom got out of the Buick, followed on foot, staying back, keeping to the shadows. Eddie cut through an alley between two abandoned row houses. No cameras, no witnesses. Anthony quickened his pace. Dom stayed at the alley entrance, watching the street. Eddie was halfway through when he heard footsteps. Turned, saw Anthony approaching. Recognition flashed, then confusion, then fear. Yo, Anthony, what? You were there. Where? Man, You were there, Eddie. You know what I'm talking about. Eddie's hand went to his pocket. Anthony raised the revolver. Don't. Eddie froze. Look, man, that wasn't personal. That was just what? Just Marco being Marco. You know how he is. You didn't have to join in. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice. You chose to piss on my father's counter while 17 people watched. You chose to laugh about it. Eddie's voice cracked. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. It was stupid. I was just what? Having fun? Yeah, no. I don't know. Please. I got a girlfriend. We're trying to... The shot was loud in the alley. Eddie fell backward, hit the wall, slid down into a sitting position. His hand went to his chest. Blood spread across his shirt. The basketball rolled away into the darkness. He looked at Anthony, tried to speak, couldn't. Anthony watched him die, felt nothing, turned and walked back to where Dom waited. They drove away. The rain started at 8:03 p.m., 8:47 p.m., June 18th, 1991. Calvin Price was 34 years old, recently paroled, trying to stay clean, failing slowly. He was walking home from his sister's house, carrying leftovers in a plastic container. Baked chicken, rice. He was thinking about his parole officer, about the drug test scheduled for Friday, about whether he could pass it. Probably not. He'd used twice this week. He was thinking about going back to prison, about doing another stretch, about how much easier it would be to just keep using and accept the inevitable. He turned onto his street. His apartment was 3 blocks away. A truck pulled up beside him. Frank was driving. Anthony leaned out the passenger window. Calvin. Calvin turned, recognized Anthony, stopped walking. Anthony, what's up? Need to talk to you. About what? About June 5th. Calvin's face went tight. Man, I wasn't even... You were there. I saw you. I didn't touch nothing. I just stood there. Standing there was enough. Calvin backed up a step. Look, I can't go back to prison. I just got out. I got a parole officer. You're not going back to prison. Calvin looked at the gun. Understanding came slow, then all at once. Come on, man, please. I didn't hurt nobody. I was just there because Marco told me to be there. You know how he is. You don't say no to Marco. Why not? Because he'll hurt you or hurt your family. That's how it works. That's how it used to work. Not anymore. Anthony, please. I got a daughter. She's 6. I ain't seen her in 4 years. I'm trying to get visitation. I'm trying to... The shot came at 8:51 p.m. Calvin dropped the plastic container. Chicken and rice spilled across the sidewalk. He fell beside it, trying to breathe, drowning in his own blood. Anthony and Frank drove away. Calvin died at 8:54, alone on the sidewalk, 3 blocks from his apartment. 4 days before his scheduled visit with his daughter. 9:32 p.m., June 18th, 1991. Jose Molina was 26 years old, newly married. His wife, Teresa, was 3 months pregnant, though they hadn't told anyone yet. They were sitting on their couch watching television when someone knocked. Jose got up, looked through the peephole, saw Dom standing in the hallway. Jose and Dom knew each other, grew up 2 blocks apart, played baseball together in middle school. Jose opened the door. "Dom, what are you doing here?" "Need to talk to you, Jose." "About what?" "About what happened at the deli." Jose's expression changed. He glanced back at Teresa. "Not a good time, man." "Won't take long. Can we do this tomorrow?" "No." Dom stepped into the apartment. Jose backed up. Teresa stood up from the couch. "Jose, what's going on?" "It's okay, baby. Just go in the bedroom." "I'm not going anywhere. Who is this?" Dom looked at her. Young, maybe 23, scared but trying not to show it. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This doesn't involve you. This is my home. Everything here involves me." Jose moved between them. "Teresa, please, just go in the bedroom." "Jose, please." She went, closed the door. Jose turned back to Dom. "She doesn't know anything about that." "I know. I didn't want to be there. Marco made me go." "I know. I didn't touch nothing. I didn't laugh. I just stood there." "I know that too. So why are you here?" "Because you were there. That's enough." Jose's voice dropped to a whisper. "Dom, please. My wife's pregnant. We're having a baby. I got a job at the warehouse. I'm trying to do right. Should have done right on June 5th. I couldn't. Marco would have. Would have what? Killed you? Maybe. So better my family suffer than yours." "That's not what I'm saying." "That's exactly what you're saying." Jose backed toward the bedroom door. Dom raised the shotgun. Jose put his hands up. "Wait, please. Let me say goodbye. Let me tell her I love her. She'll figure it out." The rouse blast was deafening in the small apartment. Teresa screamed from the bedroom. Jose fell backward through the door, dead before he hit the floor. Dom stood there, looking at what he'd done, hearing Teresa scream, knowing she'd remember this forever, knowing the baby would grow up fatherless. He turned and walked out. Teresa's screams followed him down the hallway. While Dom drove away from Jose's apartment, 4 miles away, Marco Alvarez was having dinner with his mother and sister. Chicken enchiladas, his favorite. His mother made them every Tuesday. Marco was telling a story about something funny that happened at the corner store. His sister was laughing. His mother was smiling. None of them knew that 3 members of the 9th Street Kings were already dead. None of them knew about the Buick driving slowly through the neighborhood, about the men inside making calculations about who died next. 10:17 p.m., June 18th, 1991. Luis Ramirez was 19 years old, enrolled in a GED program at the community center, trying to finish what he'd abandoned at 16 when his father left and his mother got sick and someone needed to pay rent. He was good at math, struggling with reading comprehension. His tutor said he could pass the test by August if he kept working. Luis was walking home from his girlfriend's apartment, thinking about the practice test he'd taken that afternoon, about the questions he'd missed, about whether he was smart enough to actually finish this time. He was 1 block from his building when Anthony stepped out of a doorway. Luis stopped, backed up, recognized Anthony from the neighborhood. "Mr. Sabatini." "Luis." I heard about your father. I'm sorry. Are you? Yeah, I mean it. That was messed up. You were there. Luis looked down. I know. Why? Marco told me to come. I didn't know what he was planning. When you saw what he was doing, why didn't you leave? I wanted to. I almost did. But you didn't. No. Why not? Because I was scared. Marco runs things. You cross him, you end up hurt. Or worse. So you let my father get hurt instead. I didn't think. Luis stopped. Started again. I wasn't thinking. I was just trying to stay safe. Anthony raised the revolver. Luis saw it. Didn't run. Just stood there, looking exhausted. You gonna kill me? Yeah. I figured. Eddie's dead, right? And Calvin? I heard shots earlier. Yeah, Luis nodded. You gonna kill Marco too? Eventually. Good. He deserves it more than me. You all deserve it. Maybe. I don't know anymore. I'm tired, Mr. Sabatini. I've been trying to get my GED. Trying to get out. But it don't matter how hard you try in this neighborhood. Something always pulls you back. Marco, the streets, the fact that nobody got any money and everybody's desperate. That's not an excuse. I know, I'm just saying. I'm tired of fighting it. You got family? My mom, she's sick, cancer. She know what you've been doing? No, I told her I got a job. Who takes care of her when you're gone? My aunt, I guess. I don't know. They stood there. The street was empty. A dog barked somewhere. Luis looked at Anthony. Can I ask you something? Yeah. Does killing us fix it? Does it bring your father back? No. Then why? Because 17 people watched. Because if I don't do this, the message is clear. You can destroy a man's life, and nobody will stop you. I can't live with that message. So we die so you can live with yourself. That's about right. Luis laughed, bitter. That's the most honest thing anybody said to me in years. Anthony shot him. Luis fell, died fast. His GED study guide fell out of his pocket, pages covered in careful notes and highlighted passages. Anthony looked at it, felt something crack in his chest. Not regret, just recognition. He walked away. 1:42 a.m., June 19th, 1991. Tyrone Banks was 28 years old, unemployed construction worker with 2 children, under 5. He was sleeping on his girlfriend's couch when someone kicked in the door. He woke up, saw Frank and Dom standing in the living room, reached for the gun he kept under the couch. Dom shot him before he touched it. Tyrone's girlfriend screamed. His kids started crying from the bedroom. Dom and Frank left. Tyrone bled out on the couch while his girlfriend called 911 and his kids screamed for their daddy. 3:14 a.m., June 19th, 1991. Derek Miles was 31 years old, caretaker for an elderly aunt with dementia, the only family he had left. He was awake, giving his aunt her medication, helping her back to bed. She didn't recognize him anymore, thought he was her brother who died in Vietnam. Derek played along, tucked her in, kissed her forehead, went to the kitchen to clean up, saw someone standing in the doorway. Anthony. Derek didn't run, didn't reach for a weapon, just stood there. I knew you'd come. Yeah. Heard about the others. Figured I was on the list. You were there. I was. Why? Same reason as everybody else. Marco said, show up. You show up. You participated. I stood there. That's not the same as participating. Near enough. Derek nodded. My aunt's in the other room. She's got nobody else. Should have thought about that before. I think about it every day. I think about a lot of things. But thinking don't change what happened. No, It doesn't. You gonna make this quick? Yeah. Thanks for that, at least. Anthony shot him. Derek fell. Died quietly. In the other room, his aunt called out, confused, thinking she'd heard fireworks. Anthony stood there, looking at the medication bottles on the counter, at the calendar, with doctor's appointments marked in careful handwriting, at the life Derek had been trying to maintain despite everything. He left, drove home, sat in his driveway until dawn, unable to go inside, unable to face Maria, unable to reconcile the thing he'd become with the thing he'd believed he was defending. While Anthony sat in his driveway, across the city, bodies were being discovered. Eddie in the alley, Calvin on the sidewalk, Jose in his apartment, while his pregnant wife sobbed in the bedroom. Police were being called. Families were being notified. Fear was spreading through the neighborhood. People were whispering, connecting dots. The 9th Street Kings were being hunted. Someone was eliminating them systematically, quietly. Marco heard about Eddie at 4 a.m. Got the call from someone who'd found the body. Then another call about Calvin. Then Jose. Then Tyrone. Then Derek. 5 dead in 8 hours. He knew who was next. Him and Angel. They were the only ones left. Marco called Angel. They're coming for us. I know. What do we do? Run or fight? Where are we going to run? This is our neighborhood. Then we fight. Against what? Ghosts? We don't even know where they are. We know where they'll be, eventually, at the deli. That's where this started. Marco thought about it. Yeah, okay. Meet me there at noon. Noon? Why wait? Because I got something to do first. Marco hung up, looked at his mother sleeping in the next room, his sister asleep on the couch. He'd destroyed them by tomorrow. He knew it. They'd find out what he'd done, what had been done in response. They'd carry that forever. He should run, disappear, maybe get to New York or Baltimore, start over. But where would that leave his mother, his sister? Who'd take care of them? He sat in the dark living room, smoking cigarettes, waiting for dawn, understanding that he'd set something in motion that was going to destroy everyone involved, that there was no good ending anymore, only different versions of bad. 6:23 a.m., June 19th, 1991. Angel Cruz was 22 years old, amateur boxer training for his first sanctioned fight, scheduled for July 12th at a gym near the river. He was on his morning run, 5 miles through the neighborhood, building stamina, preparing for something he'd never lived to see. He ran past the corner store, past the basketball courts, past the alley where Eddie died. Police tape marked the scene. Angel slowed, looked, kept running. He knew. Everyone knew by now. 5 dead. Marco and Angel were next. He could run. Skip town. Change his name. But boxing was the only thing he'd ever been good at. The only path out he could see, and running meant giving that up forever. He finished his run. Went home, showered. His mother was making breakfast. You hear about those boys? Yeah, Ma. 5 of them dead, just like that. I heard. You know any of them? Some. She looked at him. Knew he was lying. Knew he was involved somehow. Angel, tell me you're not mixed up in this. I'm not. Because if you are, I need to know. I need to... Ma, I'm fine. I promise. She studied his face. Didn't believe him. But what could she do? He was 22. A man. She couldn't control him. Couldn't protect him. She just nodded. Went back to cooking. Angel ate breakfast. Kissed her goodbye. Told her he loved her. Went to meet Marco. 12:34 p.m. June 19th, 1991. Temperature 84 degrees. The sun high and brutal. Marco and Angel stood outside Sabatini's Fine Meats. The shop was closed. Police tape across the door from the investigation. Marco had a gun tucked in his waistband. Angel had a knife. They waited. People walked past, giving them space, sensing violence. At 12:41, Anthony's truck pulled up. Anthony got out. Dom and Frank stayed in the vehicle. Marco stepped forward. Anthony, Marco, you killed my crew. I did. You know what that means? Yeah. So what now? We shoot it out in the street like cowboys? If you want. I don't want anything except to go back to June 4th and make different choices. But that ain't happening. No, it's not. Angel stepped forward. Why me? I didn't do nothing but stand there. Standing there was enough. That don't make sense. Half the neighborhood stands by while bad things happen. You gonna kill all of them too? Just the ones who stood by while my father collapsed. Marco pulled his gun. Anthony pulled his. They stood there, 15 feet apart, weapons raised, neither shooting. Marco's hand shook. Anthony's didn't. You think this makes you righteous? Marco's voice cracked. You think killing 8 people makes you better than us? No. Then what's the point? The point is that respect means something. That you can't walk into a man's shop, destroy his life's work, humiliate him in front of his neighbors, and walk away clean. That's what this is about? Respect? You killed 7 people because your pride got hurt? I killed 7 people because the law wouldn't. Because the neighborhood wouldn't. Because you needed to understand that actions have consequences. We understood that. We always understood that. That's why we did what we did. To show consequences, to show that the old rules were dead and we made the new ones. You were wrong. Was I? Look around, Anthony. The old neighborhood's gone. The docks are closed. The factories are empty. Guys like my father worked honest jobs and died broke. The system failed us, so we made our own system. Your system killed my father. Your father had a stroke. I didn't give him that stroke. You caused it. Maybe. Probably. But you can't kill your way back to a world that doesn't exist anymore. The neighborhood you're trying to defend is already dead. You're just too stubborn to see it. Anthony lowered his gun slightly. Marco saw the hesitation, raised his own weapon higher. So what now? Now you die, and I go to prison, and everyone loses? That's it? That's your plan? That's the reality. Marco laughed. Bitter, broken. You know what the sad thing is? We're the same. You and me. Both trying to survive in a world that don't want us. Both doing what we think we gotta do. Both wrong. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. Angel spoke quietly. I had a fight scheduled. July 12th. First real fight. I've been training my whole life for this. Anthony looked at him. I'm sorry. You're sorry? You're about to kill me, and you're sorry? Yeah. That don't help me. I know. Marco's gun steadied. I got a mother, a sister. They depend on me. I got kids. They depend on me too. So we're both leaving people behind. Yeah. They stood there. The street emptied. Windows closed. Everyone disappeared. 2 men with guns. A dead neighborhood. A code that survived longer than the world that created it. Marco's finger moved to the trigger. Anthony's did the same. See you in hell, Anthony. Probably. Marco fired first. Missed. Anthony didn't. The bullet hit Marco in the chest. He staggered backward, hit the window of the deli, slid down. Angel ran. Dom got out of the truck, chased him. Angel made it half a block before Dom caught him. They struggled. Angel was younger, faster, stronger. He broke free. kept running. Dom raised the shotgun, fired. Angel fell, didn't get up. Anthony walked to where Marco lay dying, sat down beside him. Marco coughed blood. "Your father, tell him I'm sorry." "He can't talk anymore." "Then just tell him." "Okay." Marco died at 12:47 p.m. Anthony sat there until the sirens came. Dom and Frank got back in the truck, drove 2 blocks, parked, waited. Anthony stayed with Marco's body, his gun on the ground beside him, his hands empty, waiting for the police to arrive and end this. Bodies surfaced slowly over the next 36 hours. 8 dead. All gang members. All killed execution style. All members of the 9th Street Kings. Fear spread through South Philadelphia like smoke. People locked doors, avoided streets, whispered about revenge, about gang wars, about the violence finally consuming everything. But the truth spread too. Witnesses came forward, people who'd seen Anthony's truck, who'd seen Dom and Frank, who connected the dots between June 5th and June 19th. The Sabatini brothers surrendered on June 21st, 1991, at the 3rd District headquarters. They walked in together, unarmed, and confessed to everything. Named every victim, described every killing, took full responsibility. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The defense argued institutional failure, systemic abandonment, a father destroyed, and sons responding with the only tools the neighborhood had taught them. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Anthony, Domenico, and Frank Sabatini each received 8 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. They were sent to separate facilities. Anthony to SCI Graterford, Dom to SCI Rockview, Frank to SCI Dallas. They would never see each other again outside courtrooms during appeals. Every appeal failed. The deli closed permanently in November 1993. Maria couldn't run it alone, couldn't afford to hire help, couldn't bear to stand behind the counter where it had all started. The maple counter was seized as evidence during the investigation, photographed and documented and tagged, then destroyed when the case closed because nobody knew what else to do with 12 feet of wood that 8 men had died to avenge. It ended up in a landfill outside the city, buried under decades of garbage, forgotten. Salvatore Sabatini died in 1997 from a second stroke. He never regained his speech, never returned to the shop. Spent his final years in a chair by the window, watching the neighborhood change, unable to speak about what his sons had done in his name. Maria raised Salvatore Jr. and Lucia alone. She worked 2 jobs, kept the house, visited Anthony exactly once in 1993, and told him she was done, that she couldn't carry this anymore, that he'd made his choice, and she was making hers. She never came back. Salvatore Jr. changed his name to Salvatore De Luca, taking his mother's maiden name. He moved to Oregon at 18, became an accountant, married, had children who never knew their grandfather's story. Lucia refused to speak to Anthony for 11 years. She wrote him a letter in 2002, on her 19th birthday, 1 page, telling him she understood what he'd done and why he'd done it, and that understanding didn't mean forgiveness. She never wrote again. The victims' families buried their dead. Eddie Foster's mother had a nervous breakdown and never fully recovered. Calvin Price's daughter grew up without ever meeting her father, was raised by her aunt, and developed a drug problem of her own by 17. Jose Molina's wife, Teresa, lost the baby 3 weeks after the shooting from stress and grief. She moved back to Puerto Rico and never returned to Philadelphia. Tyrone Banks's children were placed in foster care when their mother couldn't handle raising them alone. Derek Miles's aunt died in a nursing home 6 months later, calling for a nephew who never came. Luis, Ramirez's mother, died of cancer in 1992, alone, never knowing exactly what her son had done or why he'd been killed for it. Angel Cruz's mother attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row, staring at Anthony, trying to understand how defending honor required killing a 22-year-old boxer with a future. Marco Alvarez's mother and sister left South Philadelphia in 1992. Nobody knows where they went. Was Anthony Sabatini a murderer? Yes, he eliminated 8 people with premeditation and calculation. Luis Ramirez had a GED test scheduled. Angel Cruz had a boxing match that could have changed his life. Jose Molina's child would have been born in January. Anthony took all of those futures and erased them in service of an abstraction called honor. Was he also a father abandoned by every institution, meant to protect him, operating under a code that once meant survival, defending the only inheritance he had in the only way the neighborhood had taught him? Also, yes. Uncomfortable truth is that both things can be true simultaneously. That a man can be right about the failure of systems and wrong about his response. That defending family can become indistinguishable from destroying it. That honor, taken to its extreme, becomes a weapon that kills everyone who touches it. Broken worlds create broken people, and broken people create more broken worlds. The cycle doesn't end. It just finds new participants. In 2019, a reporter interviewed Anthony at SCI Graterford. He was 67 years old, gray, tired, worn down by 28 years in a cell. She asked if he regretted it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Every day, but I'd probably do it again." That's the tragedy. Knowing it was wrong and understanding why it felt necessary. Both things are true. I'm a murderer. I'm also a son who watched his father destroyed and knew the law wouldn't help. I don't know how to reconcile those things. I don't think I ever will. The shop on 9th Wide Street is now a cell phone store. Then it became a check cashing place. Then it sat vacant for 6 years. Now, it's being renovated into apartments, part of the gentrification pushing through South Philadelphia, erasing the old neighborhood block by block. No plaque marks what happened there. No memorial names the victims. 8 men died. 3 men went to prison forever. A family was destroyed. A counter was thrown away. And the neighborhood that created the conditions for all of it just kept changing, kept forgetting, kept moving forward, like history was something you could outrun. The maple counter that Salvatore Sabatini built in 1951, that his father stood behind, that his sons learned their trade behind, that 8 men died to avenge, is gone, buried in a landfill, rotted to nothing. Forgotten by everyone except one old man in a prison cell who still runs his hand along phantom wood every morning, feeling the grain that isn't there, defending something that stopped existing long before he pulled the trigger. Only silence remains.